It was a peaceful Saturday afternoon, and I was finally able to relax and enjoy some quiet time to myself. The house was calm, without distractions or noise, just me, my thoughts, and a chance to unwind. Earlier in the day, I'd hung out with my friend, but he had left a few hours ago to run errands with his dad. I didn't think much of it when they said they'd be gone for a while, especially since I was so comfortable at their house. It was like a second home to me. I had just settled into my friend's room, mindlessly scrolling through my phone, when I heard a soft knock at the door. It wasn't loud or hurried, just enough to make me wonder if I'd imagined it. I assumed it was the wind or maybe a neighbor, so I ignored it. But a few moments later, the door creaked open, and to my surprise, it was my friend's mom standing there. Let me pause for a moment to give you a picture of her. She's always been kind and welcoming, the kind of mom who instantly makes you feel at home when you walk through the door. But this time, something felt off. Her usual warm smile was replaced by a more serious, almost hesitant look. She stepped into the room and gently closed the door behind her. My stomach twisted, not because I was scared, but because I couldn't quite figure out what was going on. Her presence was unexpected, and the stillness in the air made everything feel oddly intense. She sat down at the edge of the bed, looking as though she had something important to say. I noticed how she was fidgeting with her hands, like she was unsure how to begin. "Hey," she said finally, her voice soft. "I just wanted to talk to you about something. Something I think you should know." And just like that, the mood in the room shifted completely. I didn't know where this conversation was heading, but I could tell it was going to be something unforgettable. I stayed still, trying to remain calm while my mind raced. What could she possibly want to talk about? She looked at me for a long moment, as though weighing whether or not to continue. Her hesitation only made me more anxious. I wasn't sure if I should say something or stay silent. I chose to stay quiet, sensing that whatever was happening, I shouldn't interrupt. She let out a small sigh, almost like she was bracing herself. "I know this might seem a little strange," she began, "but I've noticed a few things lately, things about you, and about how things are when you're here." Her voice was steady, but there was an underlying seriousness that made my chest tighten. What was she talking about? What had I done? A thousand thoughts flashed through my mind, but none of them made any sense. She paused, as if carefully choosing her next words. "You're a good kid," she said at last, her tone softening slightly. "I've always thought that. You're polite, respectful. You're like family to us." She smiled faintly, but there was something unspoken in her expression, as if she was building up to something bigger, something she hadn't quite said yet. I tried to respond, but the words caught in my throat. Thank you," I managed, my voice awkward and unsure. "I really appreciate that." She nodded, but her gaze stayed on me. "That's why I think it's important to talk to you about this," she said, her voice dropping a little. "I don't want to make you uncomfortable, but I need to know if you've noticed anything unusual." Unusual? The word hit me like a jolt. My heart began to race, and I struggled to understand what she was getting at. But before I could ask, she leaned in slightly and said something that completely threw me off. "Have you ever felt like someone's been watching you?" she asked, her voice barely above a whisper. I froze. Watching me? The question was so unexpected, so out of place, that I didn't know how to respond. I blinked at her, trying to process her words, but all I could do was let out a nervous laugh. Uh, no, not really, I said, though even I could tell my voice didn't sound convincing. Why? What do you mean? She leaned back, observing me closely, as though trying to figure out if I was being truthful. "It's probably nothing," she said after a pause, but the way she said it made it clear she didn't fully believe that herself. "I've noticed a few things, small things. Doors left open, lights on when no one's around." She hesitated again, her eyes flicking toward the window. "The other night, I thought I saw someone outside near the house." A cold shiver ran down my spine. My mind flashed back to all the times I'd stayed over here, to all the little noises I'd brushed off as the house settling or the wind. Could I have missed something? Or maybe, deep down, I didn't want to admit I'd noticed it, because I didn't want to be scared. "I didn't want to scare you," she continued, her voice breaking the silence. "But I thought if you'd seen or heard anything, you'd tell me, right?" I nodded slowly, though my thoughts were spinning. What was she trying to say? Was she just being overly cautious, or was there really something going on here? Her words hung in the air, heavy with a tension I couldn't shake. "I haven't noticed anything," I said cautiously, though doubt was starting to creep in. Hadn't I heard strange sounds before? Hadn't I seen shadows move at the edges of my vision, only to tell myself it was my imagination? She studied me carefully, her expression unreadable. "Maybe I'm just being paranoid," she said with a faint smile. "It's probably nothing, but—" She trailed off, as though trying to reassure herself more than me. Just then, almost on cue, there was a sound from the hallway. Soft but clear. We both froze. "Did you hear that?" she whispered. My heart pounded in my chest as I nodded. It wasn't loud, just the faint creak of someone stepping on the old wooden floors. But in the silence of the house, it was enough to send chills through me. "Stay here," she said, suddenly standing up. Her voice was firm, but I could sense the unease beneath her calm. "Wait," I blurted, grabbing her wrist instinctively. What if it's something serious?" My voice wavered, betraying my fear, and I hated how obvious it was. She hesitated, then gently pulled her arm free. "It's probably nothing," she repeated, more for herself than for me. But as she moved toward the door, I couldn't shake the sinking feeling in my chest. The door creaked open, and she peeked out into the hallway. I held my breath, every nerve on edge. For a moment, there was nothing but silence. Then she stepped out, disappearing into the shadows of the hallway, leaving me alone with my racing thoughts and the unsettling certainty that something was wrong. I sat there, staring at the door. Every second felt like an eternity. The house felt unnervingly still, like all the usual sounds of life had been swallowed up. My ears strained to catch any noise, her voice, her footsteps, anything. But the hallway remained silent. I wanted to get up, to follow her, but something kept me frozen in place. Was it fear? Or was it that nagging feeling that there was something I wasn't being told? Just as I started to convince myself that everything was fine, I heard it. A muffled thud, followed by a low scraping sound. It wasn't loud, but it was enough to make my heart race. I stood up instinctively, my body tense and my mind spinning. "Mrs. Carter?" I called out, my voice barely a whisper. There was no answer. I stepped toward the door, each movement feeling heavier than the last. When I reached the threshold, I hesitated, gripping the door frame like it was the only thing keeping me steady. The hallway stretched before me, dim and eerily quiet, but something was wrong. At the far end, near the staircase, I thought I saw a shadow for just a second, like someone moving out of sight. My stomach tightened. "Mrs. Carter?" I called again, louder this time. Still, there was no response. I took a shaky step into the hallway, every instinct screaming at me to turn back, to stay in the room. But something pulled me forward, a mix of worry and the nagging sense that I needed to know what was happening. As I approached the top of the stairs, I felt it, a faint draft from below. That's when I noticed the front door, which had been shut earlier, was now slightly ajar. My heart raced as I crept closer, looking around nervously. The house felt too empty, too quiet, and just as I reached the top step, a sudden noise behind me made me spin around. Standing just a few feet away was someone I never expected to see. I froze, my breath catching in my throat. My friend, his face pale and his expression unreadable, was there. "What are you doing here?" I blurted out, my voice shaky. "I thought you were with your dad." He didn't answer right away. Instead, he glanced over his shoulder as if checking to see if someone was behind.